It began as a single click in the silent corridors of the abandoned psychiatric wing. A breaker somewhere deep in the building flickered back to life, and antique lights overhead buzzed faintly. The dust that had gathered on chipped tiles trembled with the new surge of electricity. Whether by glitch or fate, the old emotional trauma therapy machine, the one rumored to probe too far into the mind, was stirring from its decades-long slumber. Nobody noticed at first, for the hospital staff rarely ventured into these locked sections. They assumed everything stored there was defunct, too ancient or risky to ever be used again. But in a place devoted to healing minds, curiosity eventually got the better of someone. The machine, shaped like an archaic steel pod, was discovered by two junior technicians, Mira and Terrence, who had been tasked with reorganizing the basement storage. Mira ran her flashlight over the metallic plates etched with archaic wiring diagrams. The label on a rusted nameplate read, Emotional Resonance Therapy, ERD. Beneath it was a cautionary note in illegible script, half scratched out. "We should probably report this," Mira said, leaning forward. Her breath caught dust swirling in the beam of light. She couldn't help feeling drawn to it, as if the machine was waiting for a new subject to step in. Terrence smirked, that edge of mischief shining in his eyes. "It hasn't been used in decades. Do you think it still works?" he asked. Mira shook her head. The hospital's modern therapy approaches had long outclassed these old devices, which were practically relics. "I doubt it," she began, but her words died as she reached a hand toward a control panel. A faint hum thrummed beneath her fingers. "It's powered?" she muttered in disbelief. The next day, after reporting their find, the hospital's administration decided to investigate. Whether they wanted to see if it could be repurposed or to confirm it was junk, the staff wasn't sure. But for some reason, a few patients who had failed to respond to traditional methods were selected to participate in a historical therapy demonstration. Supervised, in theory, by a small team, the machine was carefully wheeled out of the basement and into a specialized therapy room, rarely used in the hospital's modern era. Observers, doctors, psychiatrists, even administrators gathered with quiet excitement. They wanted to witness one last curiosity before the contraption was hauled away to a museum or sold for scrap. In the morning of the demonstration, 5 patients were chosen. Lauren, a single mother with lingering postpartum anxiety. Rudy, an older man grappling with persistent nightmares from his war service. Cassie, a distressed teenager whose night terrors no medication could tame. Ken, a stoic businessman whose panic attacks threatened his career. And Gina, a soft-spoken nurse who had volunteered to see if the machine might aid her own childhood trauma. Each was assured that the session wouldn't last long, and trained professionals would guide them step by step. Inside the therapy room, a ring of observation windows stared into the central space. The ERT device, a bluish-gray pod large enough for one person to lie in, sat in the center. A nest of cables and diodes was arranged around it, reminiscent of an old science fiction film. Dr. Fuller, the lead psychiatrist, stood behind a console of blinking lights, microphone in hand, explaining how the machine was supposed to work. "Our records say it uses a combination of electromagnetic pulses and guided imagery to access deep emotional memories," Dr. Fuller spoke, scanning the documents he'd pulled from old hospital archives. "The user enters a dreamlike state. Under supervision, negative feelings are confronted. In theory, it offers expedited healing, but we also have documentation that the therapy was discontinued due to unpleasant side effects." He coughed as though burying that thought. Lauren, the first volunteer, inhaled sharply, then climbed into the large pod with the help of 2 nurses. She was strapped in lightly, receiving the standard sedation procedure the manual indicated. The door slid shut with a soft clang. Dr. Fuller and a small team started the machine, flipping switches and adjusting dials. The overhead lights flattened to a dim glow. At first, everything proceeded predictably. Flickers of old machinery came to life. The monitors connected to the ERT beeped and traced out swirling lines of neural activity. Lauren's vital signs appeared normal. Her eyelids fluttered inside the enclosed space, as if she were in a mid-range sleep state. However, as the therapy session progressed, the apparatus's hum grew louder. For a moment, the overhead lights flickered again, and then silence. Smoky air hissed out of the pod. Panicked, Dr. Fuller tried to shut down the machine. Instead of turning off, it locked itself in place, a panel on the side illuminating a message that read, "Submersion level deep." Lauren's monitors displayed erratic spikes. Her breathing quickened, sweating beading across her forehead. From inside the viewing room, the other volunteers and the hospital staff watched in disquiet. One nurse pressed her face to the glass window of the therapy room. "We should open it," she whispered. "She's trapped in there." But the mechanical locks refused to disengage. Terrence and Mira scrambled to pry off a side panel, searching for an emergency override. Nothing worked. Meanwhile, Lauren's vital signs alarmed. The readout said her mind was deep in stress mode, as though she were facing terror from within a nightmare. Unable to wake her, the medical team anxiously continued to troubleshoot. A sudden hiss came from the instrument console. Pieces of old circuit boards glowed in a circle of sputtering sparks. And then something even more unexpected happened. The therapy room door's electronic system glitched. It sealed shut, ignoring the code Dr. Fuller typed in repeatedly. People in the outer corridor tried from their side, banging on the glass. They were just as stuck. Nobody could get out, and nobody else could get in. The ERT's humming soared to a high pitch. Then it cut off, replaced by an eerie calm. On the overhead monitors showing Lauren's neural activity, the pattern shifted to a steady, stable wave. "She's in REM sleep," Dr. Fuller mumbled, brow furrowing. "But it's as if she's fully immersed in something." Lauren's sweat-soaked face looked oddly serene, no longer contorted in terror. Before the group could make sense of this abrupt shift, the therapy pod opened with a grinding hiss, releasing Lauren in a limp sprawl. Terrence and Mira rushed to help lift her out. Her eyes fluttered open as she looked around with confusion. Then, strangely, she blinked and asked, "Why are you all here?" "I was just at home, in my bedroom." She gazed at the unfamiliar instruments. "I remember a dream, or was it real?" She described a harrowing confrontation with phantoms of her past, fearsome shapes creeping from her closet, telling her she wasn't good enough. "But then I felt a release," she whispered. Though physically exhausted, her voice held relief, as if she'd just awoken from a particularly intense therapy session that had actually helped. Dr. Fuller was about to breathe a sigh of relief when a new problem surfaced. The therapy room door remained sealed, and alarms flashed from the console. The ERT machine rebooted, and sparks danced once more across its side panels. Before anyone could fully process Lauren's apparent success or the jammed doors, the overhead lights flickered ominously, and the machine's main compartment slid open again, as if inviting the next patient. Rudy took a hesitant step forward. He was older, and an unsteady feeling in his gut told him this was a bad idea. "But," Dr. Fuller reasoned, "we might as well see if it can help you too, while we figure out how to unseal these doors. Perhaps there's a pattern in the therapy process that we can replicate, or forcibly shut down after completion." The logic felt questionable, but in the stifling atmosphere of the locked therapy room, adrenaline and fear muddled judgments. Reluctantly, Rudy climbed into the pod. Once more the contraption sealed shut. The lights dimmed, and the machine's hum swelled. Outside, the staff members scrambled to reset the digital lockdown on the door. All attempts failed. Another wave of sparks hissed from the circuit boards. For a moment, the entire hospital seemed to groan, as if some hidden power source deep below the building was fueling this archaic device. Rudy's reading spiked on the monitors. He muttered, No, not again," inside the pod's muffled environment. His breathing turned shallow, and tears slipped from the corners of his closed eyes. Dr. Fuller hovered anxiously near the external readouts, observing the spikes of fear rising in Rudy's mind. Suddenly, the readout soared to a terrifying peak. Everyone watching braced for the worst. Then, like a snap, the machine's hum cut off. The pod sprang open. Rudy, gasping, staggered out. He rubbed his face, sweat glistening on his forehead, and tried to speak. They were all there, he said in a trembling voice, referring to men he had lost during the war. I kept seeing them. Then, somehow, I had a chance to talk to them, to say what I never got to say before they died. He swallowed a shaky breath. It felt so real. But they forgave me. They told me to let go. His words carried a mixture of awe and raw relief, as if the therapy machine had granted him a fleeting reunion and a wave of closure. In the momentary calm that followed, Dr. Fuller studied the ERT readouts, scribbling notes. I can't say I understand any of this. It should be impossible for such vivid illusions to prove therapeutic so quickly. He glanced at the locked doors. Security was banging on them from the outside, using crowbars and emergency devices that had no effect. Some unstoppable glitch in the hospital system had them sealed like a vault. Meanwhile, Ken paced the room, arms crossed over his chest. A habit from countless corporate board meetings, he cleared his throat. I can't stand being locked in here. My heart is pounding. It's going to trigger a panic attack. He pressed a hand to his sternum, forcing controlled breaths. Even though he had come as a volunteer for new therapy methods, the sudden captivity was fueling his dread. Gina tried to calm him. She had a gentle, supportive demeanor earned from years of nursing. Breathe, Ken. We're okay for now. We just need to focus on solutions, she said, though her own worry was evident in her trembling fingers. Cassie, the teenager, sat in a corner, knees drawn to her chest. She was quietly crying, trying to hide her tears behind her hoodie. The ERT's lights flickered once more, capturing everyone's attention. Ken's eyes darted to the door. He wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The only question was whether to fight the machine or give in. Without speaking, he stepped forward and placed a hand on the metal shell. His reflection stared back at him in the dull surface, a reflection of a man taught to bury vulnerabilities beneath stoicism and spreadsheets. I'll do it, Ken said, though his voice quivered. This thing is letting people face their fears, right? Well, I need that more than ever. Mira and Terrence assisted in hooking him up. Ken slid inside, chest heaving in apprehension. The door sealed behind him with a cold clang. That fateful hum began again. On the external monitors, Ken's heart rate soared, his face contorted. Dr. Fuller's notes indicated a match with extreme panic. The staff feared he might go into cardiac arrest if the mental assault from the machine grew too intense. Ken's vital signs beeped incessantly. The machine's emergency shutoff refused to respond. Then unexpectedly, the swirling lines of neural output on the monitor turned fluid, forming a calmer pattern. Ken's body relaxed. When the pod hissed open, he was breathing with measured control. His eyes looked clear, but haunted. I freed myself from an old memory, he murmured. I never told anyone this. When I was 9 years old, I got stuck in a stuck elevator with my father. He'd just lost his job. We were trapped for hours. I thought we might die. It started my fear of suffocation, of being closed in. Now, somehow, I saw that memory again, but I forgave myself for being unable to help. My father told me it wasn't my fault. The group shared a moment of stunned silence. 3 patients had gone in. Each confronted their worst trauma and emerged changed. Despite the fearsome contraption, it was undeniably effective. Dr. Fuller, still pressed by the locked doors, couldn't ignore the bizarre success. He turned to Cassie, the teenager who was huddled in the corner. She shook her head at first. No, I can't. My nightmares. They aren't just nightmares, they're horrible. But the machine once again showed signs of reactivation, lights dancing along its surface like a serpentine suggestion. Cassie wiped her tears. If it helps me sleep at night, if it gets me out of this place. She tried to stand confidently, but her legs quivered. Steeling her resolve, she walked to the pod and lay down. As the door sealed, she trembled under the darkness. Outside, Rudy and Lauren approached Dr. Fuller. Shouldn't we see if we can shut it down first? Lauren asked, but Dr. Fuller shook his head. We tried. Everything's frozen. This might be the only way for everyone inside to get out safely. If the system is running on some weird program, maybe once it cycles through all the volunteers, it'll release us. Mira and Terrence read the neural output as Cassie's readout spiked erratically. She was younger, perhaps more vulnerable to the illusion. Cassie jerked violently within the pod and the machine rattled. Worried, Gina pressed her ear to the closed hatch. She thought she heard Cassie crying out for help. Then the lines on the monitors steadied, and the therapy session ended. The door cranked open, unveiling Cassie's limp form. Although she was awake, tears streaked silently down her face. "I saw him." "Him?" Cassie said, voice breaking. "My ex-stepfather? He used to. Her words trailed off, but her eyes spoke volumes. The memory had haunted her for years, through nightmares. In the nightmare, he was in my room. I never confronted it. But in there, I told him to go away." She clung to Gina, sobbing into the nurse's arms, her body trembling with a mix of terror and relief. Now there was only Gina left. Her volunteering had been partly to face her own ghosts, partly to empathize with the patients, but she wasn't sure she wanted to revisit the horrors that lay buried in her mind. She felt claustrophobic just thinking about entering the thick metal therapy pod. And yet, across the room, the ERT machine was reawakening, the overhead lights blinking in time with its electric pulses. The locked therapy room felt like a chamber outside of time. No one from outside had managed to break in. No electronic override had magically come online. And the air felt colder too, as if the machine's presence was draining the warmth out of every corner. Gina's eyes traveled over the group. They had all faced their deepest torments. To her astonishment, each one looked oddly tranquil once the process had finished. She considered her own hidden terrors. Could she truly set them free too? Taking a steadying breath, Gina walked to the machine. "Let's get this over with," she said. Dr. Fuller hovered nearby, as if on standby to comfort her after the ordeal. She offered him a sad smile, then climbed in. Her heart thudded. The door sealed. Darkness closed in. The humming surrounded her, a deep vibration echoing in her chest. Soon, the swirling lights of her psyche flooded the monitors outside. Gina's mind spiked with distress. She felt herself falling inward, sinking through layers of sneaking hallways in her subconscious. At the end of one corridor lay her childhood bedroom. She recalled how she used to hide under the blankets from the screams in the next room. Her father raging at her mother, nights that ended in threats and broken dishes. In the machine's dreamscape, Gina was a trembling child again, facing the shadow of her father towering over her. But in this twisted realm, she found a shred of adult lucidity. She recognized she was in a place where she could speak back to him. She uttered words she'd never dared say in real life, that she was tired of feeling she had to fix everything, that she was not his emotional punching bag, that it wasn't hers to carry. The Shadow Father roared in defiance, but with every word Gina spoke, he shrank. Memories of fear that had once loomed huge in the corners of her mind began to dissipate. She felt tears streaming down her cheeks, catharsis shaping every breath. Outside, the machine's readouts trembled at high amplitude, but slowly the lines found a steady state. Dr. Fuller watched, transfixed, as each volunteer's experience had proven the device's uncanny power. Then, abruptly, the ERT's hum broke off, replaced by a loud churning hiss. The overhead lights faltered, flicked off, and struggled back on. The sealed therapy room door beeped with a groan and slid open a crack. Immediately, staff from the other side crowded the threshold, forcing the door fully open. They rushed in with medical gear, demanding updates, a flood of confusion on their faces. The therapy pod swung wide. Gina emerged, shaky but upright, tears still wet on her face. Relief soared through Dr. Fuller, Terrence, and Mira. Without warning, the entire hospital's interior lights flickered, and a fuse somewhere popped. A few overhead bulbs shattered, dropping shards of glass onto the floor. Then everything stabilized. The ERT machine gave one last sputter, then died. No hum, no flicker. Just a dark, inert shell sitting in the middle of the therapy room. In the aftermath, staff led each patient out on a stretcher or with supportive arms, though many insisted they felt more alive than ever. The group was medically evaluated and found to be exhausted but free from physical harm. Administrators debated what to do with the device. Some argued to destroy it immediately. It was too unpredictable, too dangerous. Others marveled at its potential. It had somehow done in minutes what years of therapy sometimes couldn't accomplish, though at the terrifying risk of losing someone to the depths of their own nightmares. Days later, the hallways were bustling again. Lauren was discharged, feeling more at peace with her role as a mother and her anxious thoughts. Rudy's night terrors had lessened, replaced by dreams of reconnecting with loved ones lost. Ken faced high-pressure corporate meetings without the usual suffocating panic. Cassie slept over 7 hours at a time, no longer plagued by the recurring horrors. And Gina returned to her duties as a nurse with a lifted heart, as though a weight she'd carried for decades had finally been put down. Dr. Fuller, meanwhile, oversaw the official inquiry. He compiled the data gleaned from the forced demonstration. Preliminary results suggested the ERT tapped into each user's latent emotional memories and manifested them as hyper-real illusions that could be interacted with. The device's origins were murky, tied to research overshadowed by ethical concerns. Given the fiasco of that day, patients locked inside a therapy room, the machine overriding safety protocols, no official path to resurrect the technology seemed feasible. The board of directors voted to shut it down forever and place it under lock and key. The last file Dr. Fuller read explained a chilling detail. Years ago, the device's main inventor, Dr. Werner, had been so consumed by personal grief that he used the ERT on himself countless times, chasing the ghost of his deceased son. Eventually, he lost his mind entirely, slipping into an unending dream state from which he never woke. The therapy unit was sealed away after that. Dr. Fuller swallowed hard. Could that heartbreak have corrupted the machine? Or was the device always dangerous, amplifying its users' desperation? That evening, well past standard visiting hours, Dr. Fuller stepped into the storage corridor to see the ERT machine for what he hoped was the last time had been relocated to a special locked chamber, fitted with multiple backup power cuts. All was quiet, the overhead bulbs buzzing softly. He slowly approached the machine's steel shell, his reflection cast back in its dull side panel. He felt an unexpected pull, the subtle temptation to see if it could do something for him, too. He was no stranger to nightmares. He'd devoted his life to mental health for a reason. Witnessing his mother's slow descent into dementia had left him with unspoken guilt. The question that haunted him was whether he'd done enough, whether he had ever truly been there for her in her final weeks. The old therapy device beckoned like an unwelcome invitation. He kept telling himself he would not open that door to see if it could somehow give him closure. He gently laid his palm against the metal. For a moment, he could have sworn he heard the faintest hum. His heart jumped. Was that an echo of leftover power, or the device itself responding to touch? He exhaled and told himself it was his overactive imagination. The machine was unplugged. Entire panels had been removed to ensure it would never spring to life again. Yet, as he turned to leave, he caught a flicker of green light at the corner of his eye. He spun back and saw it vanish, as if it had never been there. It was only a reflection, he told himself, but deep down, some part of him wasn't so sure. He walked away, each step carrying him farther from the locked chamber. In his mind, he debated whether to mention that flicker to anyone. Would they believe him? Perhaps he would keep it to himself. The board had made their decision. The ERT would never be used again. He repeated that like a mantra, trying to silence the lingering sense of unease and the flicker of curiosity that maybe, just maybe, it could help him as it had helped the others. Long shadows crept across the hospital floor as he made his way back to the main wing. Looking through a hallway window, he saw Terrence helping on a night shift, quietly reading patient charts. Mira, further along, was chatting with Lauren, who'd come for a follow-up. Life went on in the hospital, changed in subtle ways by the day the old emotional therapy machine forced them all into a twisted collective dreamland of their fears. Yes, they'd escaped, but they each carried a piece of that machine's legacy. The realization of what can happen when your deepest terrors and regrets are laid bare, confronted, and somehow melted away. Days stretched into weeks, and the story of the ERT fiasco slipped into rumor. Staff whispered about that locked device in the basement. Some insisted the entire basement was off limits, that the hospital had no interest in reactivating something so uncontrollable. Others claimed they'd heard the therapy room would be repurposed, the device shipped off for disposal. No official statement was given. It simply faded back into the shadows from which it came, and yet, late one night, long after visitors had gone, after the hum of day shift activity had quieted to a hush, a maintenance worker walked by the double doors leading down to that secured storage chamber. He paused. He could have sworn he heard a faint clicking from the other side, like a power surge. What if the old circuit box was shorting out again? The worker hesitated. Curiosity demanded he check, but a cold chill crept over him. Instead, he shook his head and kept walking. It was best not to linger near that door. Whether coincidence or something more, the therapy machine in the darkness stirred with an unseen spark. An ancient system recognized neither time nor reason, only the lingering imprint of pain, fear, and a desire for release. The heavy door outside the chamber remained locked, and the intangible hum died as quickly as it had come. No one witnessed it. But if any new spark of life ever kindled, it might one day invite another mind into its twisted dreamscape. Perhaps it would remain dormant forever, a testament to the perils and possibilities of meddling with the subconscious. Perhaps Dr. Werner's original programming lay deeper still, waiting for the right presence, the right mixture of regret and longing, to awaken it all again. Nobody truly knew. All that was certain was that the old emotional trauma therapy machine had left its mark on those who crossed its path. It demanded the ultimate confrontation with fear, offering in return, ironically, a form of peace most had yearned for, but overshadowing that gift was a single haunting truth. The line between healing and horror had never been so murky, and when you open the door to your deepest fears, you never know what might follow you back into the waking world.